Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Vic Di Cara, who is a tropical Vedic astrologer. Hi, Vic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, could you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, where should I start? Like how far back? You want to know what kind of toys I used to play with or just like what I did yesterday?
How long have you been a practicing astrologer? When did you start studying Vedic astrology?
I think it's I think it started in 2007, I would
Okay.
say. Um, that was after having been involved in Vedic culture in general, not specifically as astrology, since 1988.
Wow.
So that
Okay.
was actually the reason, I think that was probably the reason why my wife told me to get into Vedic astrology, because I had this big background in Vedic things in the first place.
Yeah, the Krishna core, isn't that right? The music?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Okay. So, did you ever study Western astrology or did you go straight into the Vedic stuff?
I went straight into Vedic stuff, and then after I got that basically sorted out, I looked at Hellenistic astrology, and that's when I realized it's really all just astrology, and all this different stratifications of it is really just kind of missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the zodiacs
Sure.
because it's a huge thing these days. I'm a Western astrologer, tropical based, and I get attacked a lot for using the wrong zodiac. So when did you start to realize through your studies in Vedic astrology that actually there's, tropical zodiac and sidereal, but most Vedic astrologers these days, they only use sidereal. Is that right?
That's right. So I think, like going back to my background, like, I had been involved in Vedic culture in general since 1988, but I didn't get into astrology until 2007, specifically astrology. So what that means is I had a working knowledge of Sanskrit
Mhm.
before, which is the native language that the classical astrological, Vedic astrological texts are written in. It's kind of like equivalent to Greek or Latin or something. So I was unlike I think 95 or 7 or 8 or 9% of the people that get into Vedic astrology. I was able to read the actual texts. And not only did I like know astrology, but I came from a background of Vedanta, which is based on studying texts, right? So I just had this background of like, you should look at source material. You should look at texts. You shouldn't just accept what somebody says. So I think that's the difference is that I actually read the books, whereas most people just don't. And that just boils down to that. And a lot of people get mad at me for saying that it sounds arrogant or something, but it's just the truth. If you just read the books, that they just give you the definitions of the zodiac, and it's just not sidereal. There's just no way around it.
Mhm.
So it's there, whether you look at the astronomical text, like specifically astronomical text, like there's a text called Surya Siddhanta, which is the most important astronomical text that Vedic astrology is based on. It just gives you a zodiac based on solstices and equinoxes in black and white with no other like alternative, no equivocation at all. If you look at the Puranas, because Puranas, which are the ancient, like you might say religious, but not really religious, the ancient cultural texts of India, they have significant sections on astronomy. If you look at those sections also, you'll find every time a zodiac based on solstices and equinoxes and nothing else, unequivocally so. So I just decided, like, why should I just follow the person in front of me
Mhm.
walking off a cliff when I have this information right here, right in front of my face, telling me? And also, I had some particular events in my personal life that coincided with me reading those texts that were like made me doubt my ability to use astrology. And then when I had, and at the same time, I had read this text, and then I just recalculated these charts that I was doubtful over. And all of a sudden, it was like, that's so much more clear. This is definitely not only is it what the texts are telling me, it's obvious, it's also what's working.
Mhm. Yeah. And Ptolemy actually mentioned that in the Tetrabiblos. that the interpretations are derived from the equinoxes and the solstices. So we have these texts in Vedic astrology. So we've got the Vedas and the Puranas. So what proof is there in that they use the tropical zodiac?
It's just in black and white. It just says, oh, the actual language is escaping the original language is escaping my memory at the time because I have a headache.
Oh,
But the it's just in black and white. It says the zodiac is based upon the four Chatushra Pratitastiti is the last line. Um, Based on the four key points that are well known everywhere throughout the world, the two solstices, Ayanam Dvitiyam and uh, Ayanam Dvitiyam Chanye, and the Vishuva, the equinox. So Ayana means solstice and and Vishuva means solstice. So like just literally in black and white in the text, they just say you get this cross of solstices and equinoxes, and the zodiac is defined by that. It's anchored onto that. It's like the way that a wheel moves on spokes. The zodiac moves on those four spokes, and then you just put two divisions each inside each quadrant, and you get the 12-fold zodiac. That's the literal textual definitions that you get.
okay.
Then, if you that's in the astronomical texts, which really don't give much in terms of how you interpret things, but the Puranas give more interpretational guidance. So they give statements like because it's northward, right? So because the upper solstice, the what we call the summer solstice, is northward, then all the symbolism that's trying from that point has to do with the northward, like feng shui quality. We would say maybe universally speaking, the northward vastu quality, which is moksha, which is the water element, which
Mhm.
is the reflectivity, the reflection, the introspection, the what you see when you look inside, and quietude and things like that. Solitude, everything that's based on the eastern, because the east is east, then it's based on the fire element, and everything trying to that has the symbolism. So they give, just like you mentioned Ptolemy in the Puranas, they also spell out how you derive the symbolisms of the signs based on how they're related to the four cardinal directions, which is defined by where this famous cross is of the solstices and the equinoxes.
Okay. So why are a lot of Vedic astrologers ignoring this?
Um, None of the reasons are very flattering. you know, well, I mean, I could say maybe it's flattering, or maybe it's a good quality to be loyal. So they're kind of loyal to just the way that they were taught, and they don't want to make waves. And that might be one way of doing it. Another thing is just like people don't like to change. I mean, I myself, so I started practicing in 2007, practicing. So that means I was actually dealing with people, giving interpretations, etc., since 2000 and maybe 2009. But I didn't realize this whole thing about the tropical zodiac until 2012. Now that seems like nothing, but at the time that seems like 100% of my career was invested in the sidereal framework, right? 3 years of my 3 year practice was dedicated to the sidereal zodiac. So, it was really, I had to make like an actual conscious choice that, yeah, I am going to change because it's a pain in the neck. You have to, first of all, explain to everybody why you weren't like cheating them or something before, like, what do you mean? Is the reading that you just gave me before total bunk, or right? You just said this zodiac is no good, and why are you changing? And now it just casts doubt. People don't like doubt.
Mhm.
People generally, again, this isn't flattering either, but people generally don't like to think. People just like to be told.
Yeah.
So, if you bring up a doubt, it forces people to think, and people just aren't really happy being asked to think. I had a friend recently in the music scene. I read an interview that he was giving with somebody, and he said, because he's in a very famous band, so he used to like get escorted through the airports and everything. So like he's just said, like for like 12 years of his life, he would just look at the backpack that was right in front of his face, in the airport and just follow the backpack. And after traveling through all the airports of the world multiple times, he still had no idea how you even go up to a ticket counter, what you do with your bags, nothing, because he just followed the backpack in front of him. And the guy told him everything to do when he needed to do it. Then later, when he has a kid and he's got to try to be a dad and, like, have somebody else follow him, he has no idea what to do. So I think people are like that. We just follow the
Yeah.
backpack that's in front of our nose, and that's the easy way. And if suddenly there's no backpack there, it gets really scary and we don't know what to do.
Hmm. Yeah. So we have the evidence in the Vedas and the Puranas of the tropical zodiac. Now, how did it come that they started to use the sidereal only? Like, was it an initiatory practice initially, and then somehow everyone got their hands on it and it was misinterpreted?
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of this new sci-fi series called Silo. It's on Apple TV. And it was a trilogy of books. It's really quite a good book by an independent author. And one of the reasons why I like it, because it really highlights how iffy history is. So, if we talk about how something happened in history, it's pretty iffy. Like, we don't know, we weren't there.
Hmm.
But you look back on it and you try to figure it out as best as you can based on the evidence that you have at your disposal. So basically, as far as I understand the history of what happened, it wasn't just India, but it was just people in general. All over the world is pretty much the same. In fact, if you go back, and my numbers are rough because I'm not really like a stickler for exact numbers or anything. I'm more in the concepts than exact details. But if you go back about 2,500 years or something, and prior to that, you all of a sudden you find like a vacancy of horoscopic astrology. There's none of it. You just find astrological records mostly talking about meteors or eclipses or the phases of the moon or various things that are just directly obvious and a lot to do with stars, visible stars. But then all of a sudden there's a particular point in history, which is roughly like 25 or 2,000 years ago, where it just explodes. There's this zodiacal explosion of astrology based on these 12 signs and then the houses of how those signs relate to the horizon. The reason for that being, not that they didn't know about it before that, because you see calendars and everything as far back as you can go based on these 12 divisions. But it's the difference between knowing about something and being able to use it is quite significant. So although humans have always had this concept of a 12-fold division of the year, 12-fold division of the sun's orbit, because it's just obvious, because there's 12 moons, more or less, we weren't really able to do anything with it because of the math, just because we hadn't mastered the math. But at about that time in history that I'm referring to, they start to make significant advances in the maths and be able to figure out where are these places in the sky, because these are things we can't directly see. The zodiac divisions aren't things you see. They're the divisions of the day and night, the length of the day and night. But they started to get the math going and they were able to use it, and then everybody started using it because it's a fantastic system. So, but then the way that they went from not being able to do the math to being able to do the math is you have to fact check. Like, you have a theory and you write up a formula and it looks like it works, but then you check. So you come up with this theory to see, I think that right now such and such should be ascending, such and such zodiac sign should be ascending. Well, you have to be able to check it to see if it really was. So they will be able to see, you can see planets, you can see signs. I mean, you can see planets, you can see stars, but you can't see signs. So they would
Yeah.
correlate stars to signs, right? Like they would say, oh, that one over there, Spica or Spica, or it's called Chitra in India. That right over there is supposed to be the begin. That's where Libra is supposed to begin.
Hmm.
So we can check our math based on that star about the zodiac. And here are all of our figures are saying the moon should be in Libra at 6 o'clock at night. It should be at the apex of the sky. Let's see if it's really true. It's really true because we could see it. That's how they were able to make the corrections on the math and everything to make it work. But in the meantime, what they did was they conflagrated. They unified the sidereal space full of stars with the zodiacal space, which is just a tropical division of the sun's light. Then, of course, right away, universally speaking, people like Hipparchus is the one who's remembered, said, hey guys, you can't really rely on this. Like it's okay for now, but every year it moves out of sync a little bit more. He realized he spelled out the precession of the equinoxes.
Hmm.
So then there's where you have a diversion between India and the rest of the world. After that point, after it's spelled out clearly that this thing that we developed, this way of checking our position of the signs based on the stars, isn't fully reliable without this thing called Ayanamsha. The different people reacted to it in different ways. So as far as I have been told by other historians, like Chris Brennan and people like that who know a lot about astronomy, astrology, history, there was basically a chaos in most of the astrological world for a century or two, with some people just not wanting to leave that system of saying, look, Spica is 0 degrees of Libra, and it's just easy that way. But in the after like a century or two of, kind of dissension and unrest, everybody just said, look, we have to do it. We have to just rely upon the math because the zodiacs are not the stars. We have to make sure that we keep them separate by Ayanamsha. But India didn't. It's like the only stronghold in the world that said, no, we're sticking with this. So then the question really is, well, why? What made India do it differently? And there I might be a specialist. I might be able to give a more specialized opinion. I think it really has a lot to do with the way India's indigenous system of 27 sidereal zones, the way that it really compellingly lined up with the 12 zodiac divisions. Like it lines up exactly. And then it fits. They have a ninth where they divide signs into ninths. It's called a Navamsha. The way that also links up with the nakshatras. So you're taking this most important division, the Navamsha, linking it with these stellar divisions, nakshatra, and then linking that to the main zodiac. It just all clicked really nice. And I think that they just started to develop techniques based on that.
Okay.
And they were just into it and they didn't want to let go of that.
Yeah, but you're not the only Vedic astrologer that uses the tropical zodiac. There are others, a
There are
couple.
others. And we're growing in numbers every day.
Yay! Because
No, we really are. Yeah.
okay, that's good. And in India as well.
Actually, there's on my website, I have a page where it's for this kind of information about this thing. If you go
Okay.
to my website, on the top in the menu bar, there'll be something that says tropical with a question mark. If you click that, you'll get all my info about it. So one of the sections on there is about, historically speaking, the Indians who have already mentioned this. Because one of the reasons why people don't like it is it's kind of like a racist thing. Like, who are you? You're Italian.
Mm.
Who are you to tell me what my Indian heritage is, right? Which is kind of reasonable, like cultural appropriation, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of reasonable. But therefore, it's useful to point out that no, actually, these native Indians also have come to the same conclusion since the guy who, there's a famous person in Indian astrological history, Lahiri, the person that like set the standard Ayanamsha to use for the sidereal zodiac. His name is so ubiquitous that the sidereal zodiac is almost synonymous with Lahiri Ayanamsha, which is really supposed to be Chitra Paksha or Spica based, would be the technical name for it. So anyway, even that person himself, when specifying what Ayanamsha to use for a sidereal zodiac, he specifically said this isn't the real thing. The real zodiac is different, and the one that they used in ancient times is aligned with the seasons,
Hmm.
not with the stars. But we cannot recommend doing that for the country of India because the Indian government had commissioned him to decide this. Not because it loves astrology so much, because it needs calendars, really, that the whole country would agree upon. He said, we cannot recommend this for India because everybody will freak out too much in his own language. He said, people don't want to make, I think he specifically said, such a harsh break with tradition.
Hmm.
But we hope that, he writes, but we hope that in some future time, someone will make the appropriate corrections. So that's even the founder of the system. And then you have other people, and especially religious people. It's because in Indian religion, astrology is pretty important as a timing method for when
Hmm.
certain things are supposed to be done and when certain rituals or celebrations are supposed to be performed. So a lot of religious leaders, maybe not a lot, but a significant, batch of religious leaders also say this is incorrect. We're going to use a tropical system of calculating these things.
Yeah. So the religious calendar, which is technically what, tropical astrology is, that's kind of universal in a number of Indo-European traditions.
Yeah, it's the same. We all live on one planet, Earth. So naturally, our calendar is going to be the same calendar because we all live in the same time zone, solar systemally speaking.
Yeah. So sidereal, a lot of sidereal astrologers don't agree on the starting point of the zodiac. So
Right.
they use different stars for it.
Right.
Okay. How are they bickering amongst each other then?
Um, you could say they're bickering or disagreeing. The problem is if you don't anchor the zodiac to the solstices, what do you anchor it to, right? So naturally, the sidereal answers we anchor it to is Sidereus. We anchor it to the stars. But then the next question is which star?
Hmm.
So depending on what your answer is to that question, you have a different type of ayanamsha. Like the official one for the Indian government is Chitrapaksha Lahiri, which means the star Spica is 0 degrees Libra. End of story.
Hmm.
But there's other ones like there's a Revati, which is Pisceum, Zeta Pisceum or something, one of the Pisces stars. There's a certain angle from this star which you can use to determine the beginning of Aries. There's one from Pusha, which is like an important star in the Cancer constellation. So there's different people that find different techniques for determining the beginning of Aries,
Hmm.
and they're not exactly the same within like they're usually off with they usually differ from each other by 2 or 3 degrees.
Okay. So it's not a huge amount then. It's just a couple of
Correct.
degrees.
It's not a
Yeah.
huge amount. Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause I've studied Western astrology for, quite some time. And I really started to look at Vedic astrology and I absolutely love some of the techniques, which I was kind of using intuitively myself, but I couldn't get past the zodiac, the sidereal
Mm.
zodiac. And then I was
Yeah.
so thrilled to learn about you. One of my followers recommended you. But I have moon in Scorpio in my tropical, but I'm not
Yeah.
a moon in Libra. Like there's just no way.
Yeah.
So, was that like was that like a lightning bolt for you? Did you discover some new things about yourself when you went to the tropical zodiac?
Well, I'm like a very boring person, sort of. Like I'm very Saturnian. And like it's just like ridiculously too systematic and logical, like very linear. So I actually didn't like I downplayed all that. Although, as I said, I had been working with these particular charts at the time, and then when I tried to recalculate them with tropical, all of a sudden it was just like lights are on. This is all clear now. But what I have found, objectively speaking, like I like to try to be objective. So what I found, objectively speaking, is you'll have an equal number of people say, "Oh my God, I am not an Aries sun, but in tropical I'm an Aries sun." As you'll find an equal number of people saying, "Oh my God, I am an Aries sun," and Sidereal says
Yeah.
I'm not. So it's just because astrology is really complicated,
Hmm.
and it's all about the way these like dozens of things interact with each other that you really get a picture of what's going on. It's not really just from. It's not so easy to just, especially pin it down to one thing, you know,
Yeah.
and say, so, but in some cases, there's this great coincidence, like, you really realize that you're a Scorpio moon and you couldn't be any other way, and it's just obvious. But like in my case, I'm a Capricorn ascendant, regardless of the zodiac, whether it's tropical or whether it's sidereal. I'll be at the beginning of Capricorn if it's sidereal, and I'm at the end if it's tropical. So it wasn't really that much. Yeah, but there are some ridiculous things. Like there's ridiculous things, but I don't like to bring the argument there because it's so
Hmm.
subjective. Like in
Yeah.
my chart, there's a ridiculous seventh house, there's a ridiculous fourth house. It's just absurd. But somebody else might not find it's absurd because it's all subjective of how you interpret. So I just like to stick with like undeniable rational arguments like, okay, if it's sidereal, then why is Libra an air sign?
Hmm.
Or why is it a cardinal sign? Can you explain that to me using just the sidereal references? No, you can't, but I can explain to you why it is using the zodiac, the equinoxes and solstices.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about people that are going to watch this and say, well, I've had Vedic readings and they were using sidereal zodiac and they were really accurate. What what can we say? Because it,
Yeah, yeah, like that's also how I felt about the first 3 years of my practice. I didn't feel like I had been doing garbage for people for 3 years. I feel
yeah.
like I had been doing good readings for people for 3 years. And the reason, first of all, a lot of what is good in astrology reading is simple therapeutics and therapy.
Hmm.
It's just useful to be given a space to in which to reflect upon yourself with some kind of a structure. It's useful to have some kind of dialogue with somebody, right? Like an astrologer. It's like a therapy thing. So it really wouldn't matter if it's sidereal astrology, tropical astrology, or Chinese tea leaf readings. It's just the fact of having some kind of reflective space is a significant portion of what people take away as a positive experience.
Yeah.
Then there's also the fact that there's a lot of things that aren't really different.
Hmm.
Like the angles between planets are the same, whether you describe it as a sidereal coordinate or a tropical coordinate, they all move at the same amount. So if you have a square between Jupiter and Saturn, you still have a square between Jupiter and Saturn in either system. So a lot of interpretations based on uh, aspects and angles,
Hmm.
which is very important in Vedic astrology, the angles. We base
Yeah.
tons of things upon the Chatustan, the four main angles, and then the trines, and that's going to be the same. So there's actually quite a lot that doesn't change in spite of the glaring change of the sign positions. And quite a bit of astrology is based off of those relative positions of things. And then also there's just this intuition factor or just like a luck factor. There's an
Yeah.
intuition factor of the person. It's not everything that an astrologer does for a querent is astrological.
Yeah. That's true.
A
Very
lot of
true.
it is, yeah. And so I think that also is helpful.
Yeah. So what about the official calendar reform committee? So they decided that actually we should be using a tropical zodiac. When was that?
I'm bad with numbers. I'm bad with details, which is weird for an astrologer. But I
I
think
am I
it's
am too.
yeah. I could look it up really fast. I want to say it's the early 40s.
Yeah, I think you're right. I saw that on your website. It was the
Yeah.
early 40s. So they actually decided, yeah, okay. So we should be using tropical zodiac for this, but because of tradition and because of the religious connection that you were talking about and the dates, that they just decided not to
They
change
said
it.
it, they said it would be too jarring of a change. So remember, the people are arguing like they're arguing. We say this Christmas or whatever the equivalent is on December 24th at 7:30, and the neighboring city is saying no, it's on December 24th at 8:30. Like they're arguing that kind of a level of detail. Now you want to change it along to say it's not December 24th, it's December 31st. That's like a huge difference. Like we were just arguing about 30 minutes, but the
Yeah.
answer is like 6 hours different or 6 days different. It's too much. That's what they realized. So actually speaking, all these guys with their different ayanamshas are just arguing over a couple of degrees, but all of them are like 23 degrees off. It's too shocking.
Hmm.
It's too shocking.
Yeah. And have you received a lot of hate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
incredibly. Like I was really let down, but human beings constantly let us down. Human beings are machines built to let other human beings down.
Hmm.
You can tell I'm a Capricorn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. It was really disappointing actually how it was handled.
Yeah, because I have received that in general. Like anytime that I make a video or write an article, there's nearly always someone that pops up and talks about the I'm using the wrong zodiac. So I would imagine that you get attacked a lot for that. I've even had that come up during medical appointments, and like, people that just have seen this rubbish about, on the by NASA and the 13th sign, and they start to
Yeah,
argue. It's like
yeah.
they start to argue with me about it, and I'm having to defend astrology. It's not that
Mm,
they don't believe astrology, it's just they think that I'm using the wrong zodiac. It comes up so much.
yeah. What can you do? Like, I think since this, like, I don't know, since the 1500s or 1400s, whenever there was like the Renaissance, all of the genius, actual scientific genius minds were drained away from astrology and into other sciences.
Hmm.
So what do we have now? We just have a bunch of like people with tinfoil hats and hobbyists and people that don't really have any systematic training in astronomy
Hmm.
and don't have any systematic training in logic or debate, just sitting there arguing and giving their opinions about what's what.
Yeah.
So it's no doubt that like it's going to be difficult to make any kind of academic or like scholastic or logical or reasonable headway. But you know, it's not all of us that are like that.
No.
There are, right? So it's going to take a long time and patience. And I think it takes a lot of demonstration too, you know, because people have poor theoretical minds, but they have better mind for actual demonstration of what works. So over time, if you can demonstrate this is working really well, but again, because it's subjective, it's going to take a lot of time for that to sink in that this actually works better than the sidereal alternative. But
Hmm.
it's probably a century or two at least before you get a critical mass in Vedic astrology. But already in the last 10 years, it was so obscure when I started it that I myself just thought there was this important guy who was into this before me. His name is Ernst Wilhelm.
Hmm.
He was like the first one that I ever heard, saying like you should do tropical astrology, even if you're a Vedic astrologer. I just thought this guy, I mean, makes no sense. Like he's smart. He's obviously so smart. And he's obviously so capable as an astrologer, but how is he such a lunatic? Why is he off his rocker so much that he's saying this? And
Yeah.
that's me thinking that about him. But it took me some time to actually check, come to a point in my life where I was willing to check it and then actually check it with an open mind and read the actual text. And then I was like, oh, he's not the lunatic. He actually really is just like he seemed, really smart and reasonable and really capable, and he understands the situation. So at that time, there was like two or three people in the world doing Vedic astrology with the tropical zodiac. But now I think it must be in the hundreds.
Wow. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Western astrology has gone through Christianity, Islam, and I think the worst of all, which is the New Age. And it's been kind of reduced into something ridiculous. It's like some bizarre New Age religion. But
Hmm.
Vedic astrology hasn't been subverted like that.
Hmm.
It's kept a lot of its original practices and concepts.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Vedic astrology really has to offer to global astrology in general. Like Hellenistic astrology is very interesting, but it's kind of like archaeology. You have to try to dig up these things and find the source texts. Whereas with Vedic astrology, they've just been preserved. They're just like you just go to the library, you go to a bookstore, and you can still get these original Sanskrit texts. It's easily preserved because, like you said, in India, this it was actually a revered part of the culture and the religion, which is really synonymous, the cultural religion. So it wasn't, ostracized or demonized or actually smashed. Whereas in Western world, Mesopotamian, that European world was just like crushed by Christianity and then had to be rebuilt. So there you're going to get lost in translation. I think they even switched languages from Greek to Latin or something when they rebuilt it. And then it gets crushed by the Renaissance again. Islam probably did something. Then you get the scientific revolution. Then you get Ptolemaic reactions to trying to make sense out of the new scientific things. And then you get, like you said, modern day, just so much nutty stuff
Hmm. Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah, it's such
That's
a
what I like about
shame.
Vedic astrology. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember watching one of your videos and you were like, Vedic astrology is so fatalistic. You were kind of, frustrated. So, but that is also a kind of Indo-European thing. Oh, this is my fate, just get
Yeah.
on with it. Whereas in modern Western astrology, they are always trying to candy coat and make everything positive And it's just so far removed from the original practice.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you went to a doctor and they weren't going to tell you any bad news.
Yeah.
So what? You want to come to an astrologer and not hear anything negative about you? What's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. It's misleading and dishonest, and it gives astrology such a bad name. It
Hmm.
really does. So I want to talk to you about Krishna's birth charts.
Sure.
So is
I
this,
just want to say one thing though on that. It is
yeah,
so challenging though to
yeah,
give somebody negative information in a way that actually helps them. That is really something that that's a challenging thing. That's an art. It takes a lot of care to figure out how to
yes,
say something to somebody that they're not really going to be happy hearing, but that they need to hear. Okay,
yeah,
so let's talk about Krishna's chart. Yes.
yes. Yeah. So is there anything in his, well, first of all, where did you find his chart?
You can find this chart in a poem by Surdas, who is I think, a 16th century or maybe 14th century saint, very famous poet. So he describes the chart as it's a little bit cryptic. It's not like he says Jupiter's in the 11th house in Pisces, but he says these planets are in their domicile, these planets are exalted, these planets, blah, blah, blah. And from that, you unpack it and you get this chart. Um, However, not everybody is comfortable with that chart because it's astronomically impossible when you use what do they call them again? Ephemeris. When you use the ephemeris, like, or where you actually try to calculate the chart, you will never find a date that would produce that chart,
Oh,
which is interesting in and of itself.
that's
Because Krishna
really
says,
interesting.
yeah, when Krishna says, my birth is not a product of karma. My birth is unlike the births of normal people because I'm not a product of karma. I appear by my own volition and I make myself who I want to be. So it does make sense, actually, that his birth chart should have no um, rational position of planets in it. But since it's like that, you have some people like B.V. Raman and some others maybe who try to like figure out, well, actually, he should be born on this date because you can kind of date it from astroarchaeology to 3102 BC, and we know the month and we kind of know the day. So you can kind of make a chart from that angle too, and it would be a completely different chart. But I like this chart that Surdas gives.
So apart from, the stuff that you just said there about there isn't really any earthly date that would give, him that chart, is there anything that really stands out that says that this is an avatar of Vishnu?
Well, it's the sheer number, like I said, like it's the confluence of things really in a chart, really. It isn't really an independent, individualistic thing. There's the sheer number of things that are just fantastic. So, and like the quality of it. And one of the things that's kind of significant is having the moon rise exactly at the birth time, like having the moon be exactly on the ascendant
Hmm.
when it's exalted
Okay.
is kind of a typical thing of an avatar.
Oh,
And then it's not only that, but it's with the south node K2 as it's rising on the ascendant. And then there's other things that are just off the charts too. Like to have a certain number of exalted planets, I think he's got three, and none of them are debilitated. None of them are in any inimical dignities. The first lord in what's called Raja Yoga, it's
okay.
just like when you look at this chart, you just think, wow, this is really, really something. It's not like you would think this is God because we kind of don't even have like a concept. Who are we to judge who God is?
Mhm.
And that's the thing that I kind of like about Krishna's chart is like it's not a Walt Disney version of like who God is. Like this guy's got the North Node in the seventh house. That's not supposed to be good for marriage. Well, guess what? He didn't marry the love of his life. And guess what? He's got like hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of women as his partners. So that exactly matches Rahu in the seventh house, right?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
maybe not the most like, you wouldn't typically think of it as like, well, this is Jesus's father.
Yeah. Wow. I need to take a look at that myself. It sounds super interesting. Um, so can we talk a little bit about reincarnation?
Sure.
And is there any way to, what do you look at in a Vedic chart for the life to come? Is there anything like that?
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
future
there
life?
is. There is that difficulty. It's just like the reason why people use the stars to figure out what the zodiac is. It was because it's something you can actually see, so you can figure out if your theory is correct. That same principle comes into play here. Like, if I come up with a theory about how I should interpret a chart for my next life, it's difficult to improve on that theory or hone in on it or understand it better because I can't see what my next life is.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amorphous, really. But they have this chart called they have a chart of the 12ths of the sign, right? They subdivide signs into 12ths, and then they assign subdivisional zodiac signs within those, and then you reassemble it into a chart unto its own. And that chart is supposed to depict your next life.
Wow. Okay. And have you looked at
But
your own chart?
yeah, yeah, of course.
Did you get any insight with your next?
No, I'm too scared. I don't want to draw any conclusions.
Yeah. Does it have any connection with the ninth house?
Well, I think there's also the basic things like the 12th house is kind of next life. Ninth house would be, but you have to be like you have to be kind of intelligent to even see that or even ask that because the ninth house is the quality of your action, like
Hmm.
ethical and moral quality of your action. So of course that's going to determine your future life. So it would be really intelligent to look at a person's ninth house and say, from this house we can understand what your next life is. But I think most people wouldn't because they would immediately go to like 12th house because it's deathy or like 8th house because it's deathy or something. But I think probably you have a really good idea there that it would be better to look at the ninth house. Really, it's actually quite a lot simpler than people think.
Hmm.
Like the way that past lives and previous lives work, it's a lot simpler than people think. It's really cause and effecty, and you
Yeah.
really don't like suddenly jump to a completely like different thing. You basically keep doing what you're doing in this life. The only thing that kind of changes is your qualification or like what you deserve to achieve within that same interest.
Yeah.
And there's like so you'll see people that just have these like inborn talents. They're just they just sit down on the piano for the first time and just start playing and it sounds okay. Like what? They're like 5 years old. They didn't take any lessons. Where'd they get
Hmm.
this from? It's because and maybe it wasn't the piano that they were doing, but it's just in general they were interested in music for many, many, many lifetimes, and probably but now depending on what they do in this lifetime, that might get less, or might get more, or they might get more luck, like they make more qualified to have things go their way, or less qualified to have things go their way based on how ethically well they behaved in relation to it. But basically, you can just predict, just like you can predict where a ball is going to go by seeing where it is now, you can predict what your next life is going to be by seeing where you are now. And similarly, you can predict what your previous life was by seeing where you are now. So you don't even really need special techniques in astrology to see
Yeah.
what the past and the future life was. The whole thing is really talking about that.
Yeah. The ninth house connection, I had kind of an intuitive hunch about that because I kind of thought, well, if the eighth house is, physical death, then it makes sense that the ninth house is about the entrance into the afterlife or the next life. And then
Hmm.
I read this old astrology book, and it's called The Soul of Astrology by William Salmon, and it was written in the 1600s. And he didn't elaborate on it, but there's one line that said the ninth house is the entrance into the life to come. And I thought,
Hmm.
aha, he
Aha.
didn't talk a lot about it because, it was the 1600s and you couldn't really go beyond like the accepted
Uh,
belief, which was set by the church.
hmm.
So then I started to use it in astrology.
I like it. Then, what does it say about me? I think there's more astrology in my future then.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so, for sure.
Well, right, but that would be the conclusion that you would come to by any rational means, right? Because if I'm really obsessed with astrology in this life, I'm probably not going to suddenly forget about it in my next life.
No, no, I feel the same way about myself, for sure. So, how did the Vedic astrologers see the planets? Like, what are they? Are they realms?
Huh. You mean like in terms of astronomy, kind of like what are they?
The spirit, like, what is the spiritual meaning of a planet? I
Uh,
don't mean in astrology, but is it like that, like Saturn is a different realm and we have to pass through these different realms, almost like alchemy? Are there different beings living in those planets?
it's really difficult to truly understand Vedic cosmology because not only is it locked away in a different language, but it's actually quite a different concept than what we're used to. So it's I've been working on it. I've been specifically working on it for about 2 years now, trying to really understand what it is, and I'm kind of stuck, and that's why I'm just kind of waiting to figure out what's going on. But to the best of my understanding, the Vedic concept of cosmology is very earth-centered. It's very practical. In other words, like you're a human being and you're the one who's asking the question of what the cosmos is. So we're going to explain what the cosmos is in relation to you, not in relation to some black hole in the middle of a galaxy or something that has no meaning to you. It's going to explain what the universe is in relation to a human observer. And in relation to a human observer, what Saturn is just a moving dot of light in the sky.
Hmm.
But that's extremely important because motion is essential for time. And this is where you'll get Einstein will be like all of a sudden lights will go off with like connections with Einstein theories of how time and motion are related. But the reason for this statement and how it will come out of a Vedic concept is that time is nothing but change of things, and motion is the simplest form of change, the change of a position, of a physical position. So by things changing their physical positions, time moves. But time is kind of the most important thing in the world because nothing can bear any effect without it. If I make any effort or endeavor, it can't produce any fruit without the passing of time. And since these planets moving actually kind of regulate the movement of time, it's also they who determine when the results of actions come to pass. So it's what these, from a human point of view, what Saturn is, what Jupiter is, what Mars is these are timekeepers. These are cogs in the clock, the cosmic clock. And that's why you can read them. Just like you can read a clock, you can read the positions of these planets. They give some meaning to us by their symbolic location and how they're related with these four cardinal directions and the horizons and so forth. So you can figure out what is the nature of this time, this timestamp. So each unique combination of positions of the planets is a timestamp, and the astrologer knows how to decode the timestamp into some specific details. But it's not, of course, not easy. And then if it's another world, what the in the Vedic concept, there's concepts of worlds and realms and things which are well beyond human experience, both above and below human experience. Like, both superior to, like if you think about it, I have rabbits. I have four rabbits as pets. They have a totally different world. It intersects with mine slightly, but they're both basically in a completely different world. I have a couple of turtles too. They're in a very different universe than I am in. We just barely intersect. And then there's, gods and things also that intersect with us a little bit, but mostly they're in a totally different realm. So Vedic cosmology also has these other realms, but they're not necessarily linked with these rocks that are floating in the sky. It seems to me like these rocks are actually just kind of extensions of Earth, like Jupiter, Mars, and so forth are extensions of Earth, and they enable life on Earth to be what it is. They enable Earth to exist. But the separate realms that other entities live in are actually like different versions of Earth. Metaphorically speaking, I'm not sure I know what it means, but they're like bigger versions of Earth. And these higher beings dwell on these bigger versions of Earth that have basically the same relationship with the solar system, but you just scale up the ratio, and so the lifespans and everything increase.
Okay. So I saw that in one of your other videos that you mentioned, it was in one of the Puranas, that the world
Yeah.
that the ancestors live in is like this, but much bigger. So
Mm.
it's like a different dimension then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so these far out concepts like beings being able to, like intersection of planes,
Hmm.
intersection of is possible.
Yeah.
So you can actually you could move into a different plane, and those planes like the coordinates on a higher plane have some correspondence to coordinates on this plane. So for example, you could go to a particular place, like say there's some place in the mountains of Himalayas, and there could be like a portal there, so to speak, that which is commonly used by the entities to traverse in between each of the. These are things that are very mystical. You know, I don't have any direct experience of them, but I kind of believe in them.
Yeah, me
I don't
too.
have any reason to not believe in them. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you teaching classes these days? I know that you have a lot of information available on your website for people to download. You did a nakshatra report for me and it was great. So
Thank
are
you.
you, I know that you're really busy
Mm.
lately. Are you t like do you do live classes or is it recorded?
I think what happened was I got sucked into YouTube. So and then I feel like my educational output is actually going into my YouTube videos,
Yeah.
and I haven't really had, structured classes since that really started taking off. I do have like the recorded classes for the basic fundamentals like the planets, the signs, the houses, the nakshatras. But really on YouTube, that's where I'm doing like how do you interpret moon in the first house? How do you interpret it in the second house? How do you that kind of like second level, intermediate level stuff? I'm doing it there. Um, and then just because I'm a one man show, I think most of us are one man shows, but I kind of wish that I had like a team or something, but I'm just not a very cooperative type. Like I'm kind of a loner. Because I'm a
Yeah.
one man show, it's like now I'm working on a new report. I can't really do anything else. I can barely find the time in the day to get that done before the end of the year. So I don't really have time. Although there's one group that's doing classes with me, actually, on their own. They like kind of they had enough enthusiasm that they came and got plucked me and said, "Look, let's meet you at this time." It's not something I set up; they set it up.
Hmm.
So that's like every 2 weeks or so. But that's
Wow.
quite philosophical. It's hardly astrological.
Yeah. Yeah, well, your YouTube channel is like a complete astrology course because you cover everything in it. So I highly recommend that everyone checks you out. I'm going to leave your links below. And just before we go, I just wanted to ask you about the Kali Yuga.
Yes.
So are we still in the Kali Yuga?
I was thinking about this today in the shower. It was weird when the ideas pop up. That I might actually do a video about it. This is also one of the reasons why you get hate if you do tropical zodiac with Vedic astrology. It's because you defy the revered people.
Hmm.
Like there's so many revered people who have in the history of Vedic astrology who uses sidereal zodiac. Now some Vic Di Cara guy pops up on screen and says they're wrong. Who is this guy? Who's he? Like, how do you get like we say in Italian, how do you have the balls to say that, right? So they get mad. So the same thing would happen with Yukteswar. Yukteswar is a person who came up with a new theory about Kali Yuga. The reason for it is quite interesting because it's related to the precession of equinoxes and the sidereal tropical problem. So what he noted was, hey, there's like roughly a 24,000 year, precession. It's roughly maybe it's 26,000, something like that. It probably doesn't have a steady rate anyway. So he says, it seems like a division of 12, doesn't it? It seems like a multiple of 12. And these yugas, they're also based on multiples of 12. So he wanted to figure out a way to make sense of the yugas. Because what are yugas? Yugas are the original Puranic concept of these really long periods of time. Actually, yuga literally means anything longer than a year. So there's even 5 year yugas and 60 year yugas and things like that. But when you say yuga, it basically means the Puranic yuga, which is like huge, huge amounts of time, classically hundreds of thousands of years. So he tried to make sense of where did they get this idea? What is measuring the beginning and ending of a yuga? Like in Surya Siddhanta, it says there's this classical, like everything is at 0 degrees Aries. at the be at the beginning of at two times in history, at the beginning of Kali and at the beginning of, I think it's the second Yuga. But anyway, like they give some astronomical way to calculate where you are right now by how many orbits have elapsed since this theoretical conjunction of everything. So you can figure out where you are now within a yuga. So he's riffing on those ideas and he's saying there seems to be an astrological basis for the yugas, and I can tie it to this 24,000 year cycle. But to do so, I would have to reduce everything by a multiple of 360, which is fine for us because 360 is a very natural number, right? It's 360 degrees in a circle. So he figured out a way to say the yugas begin when, the equinox is at a certain point, and then they descend down to Kali Yuga, and then they ascend from Kali Yuga back up to the beginning at Satya Yuga. So the two problems with his theory is it is a complete invention. That's one problem. It's a problem because like people, it's appropriation, cultural appropriation. And so he's appropriated this concept of a yuga and just taken the name of yuga and defined a completely different way of measuring it than what it was meant for. The other problem with it is more significant even. The yuga, if you define the yuga based on the precession of the equinoxes, then there will be no such thing as yugas when the earth and the sun don't exist, right? If yugas are caused by the relationship between the earth and the sun and the precession of the equinoxes, then if this earth and the sun are destroyed, there's no yugas. But these time spans are actually meant to describe huge periods of time during which there is no such thing as the earth and the sun at some points in these yuga cycles. So they can't be based on how the earth is relating with the sun. So that's the biggest problem in his proposition that the yugas are actually really short. Actually, the yugas are based on this a unit of time that's created by breathing. And it's not by human breath, but it's by the breath of the creator, Brahma. So according to him, I think the Kali Yuga would have ended basically around the time that the Dark Ages ended, which also is pretty compelling. It looks like it makes sense. But according to the actual traditional concepts of the yugas, we haven't even really begun Kali Yuga yet. There's a 36,000 year dawning of Kali Yuga, and we're 5,000 years into it. People don't like that either, and people don't want to hear negative information. They don't
No.
like to hear. But it does look like it's kind of going that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
look around you. I've heard
Yeah.
that as well recently. Like people are saying, "Oh, but the Kali Yuga is ending. It's almost over." And I'm like, "No, take a look around you, and you can
Yeah.
see that that's not true." I really wish it wasn't true, but again, it's about being truthful.
Yeah. And it doesn't really matter what time of the year it is, you dress appropriately for it. If
Yeah.
it's winter out, you wear a jacket. If it's summer out, you wear shorts. If it's Kali Yuga, then you just adjust your behavior to. It's not like it crushes you. You
Yeah.
just adjust your behavior and your expectations
Exactly.
appropriately.
Yeah, and it's said to be a time when we can all achieve spiritual growth at a much faster rate.
Yeah,
No. But if we're sitting here waiting for it to end every day, then we're not going to grow.
because people have hero like they need heroes. That nobody want. Everybody wants to follow the backpack that's right in front of them. They don't. They want to be a hero themselves. So they just want to hear that Jesus Christ is coming, the second coming of Christ. What is that other thing called? Ascension, the rapture, all this stuff. The Kali Yuga is over. Everything's great. The age of Aquarius makes us feel happy, but that's not what
No. No.
that appeals to people, and it might have a value because it appeals to people. But I think rational people don't really get
Yeah.
inspired by
No. No. So I have enjoyed speaking with you so much, and I just wanted to thank you again for joining me. Is there
Thank you so
anything
much.
else that you want to say
No,
before you go?
no, sincerely, thank you so much. It's been a long time since I did an interview with anybody, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I feel honored for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.